our team who are present today as well are super excited to start sharing some of our reflections a year after starting to dedicate ourselves to the study of behavioral systems. And again, this is an evolving field, it's quite new. Often complex systems and behavioral science are thought to be kind of like opposite sides of an innovation spectrum. And they don't have to be, right? Behavioral or people, when they make their decisions, are surrounded and influenced by systems that are quite complex, and vice versa. Most complex systems that we know of have inside of them lots of people making decisions based on what others do and based on what surrounds them. So they are actually incredibly complementary, and it is important to be mindful of one another. But it is, from a theoretical point of view, it is a field that is very much evolving and gaining more depth. So we are super excited to share with you some of our thinking in this area and how to drive behavioral change in these complex systems. Next, please. Who are we? We are sistemaFutura. Again, we are a new and a one-year-old boutique firm specialized in behavioral systems. Steve and I started it because we very much believe that this is the way forward. Our background is in behavioral science, though Steve also has a background in software engineering, computational science, and systems thinking. But we very much think that the way to think about complex systems and to make progress within some of the world's most important challenges is by considering these two disciplines together. We are incredibly lucky to have been joined by an amazing team of researchers and assistants. They are truly what makes the work of sistemaFutura not only stand out and good, but also fun. So thank you all for being a part of our team and an incredible group of people to work with. Next. And importantly as well, sistemaFutura works through a network of affiliates. So a lot of our expertise, we don't claim to have expertise in everything, and especially on a lot of the themes that we work on. And we understand that oftentimes, the right tool for the right problem does not necessarily come from those two disciplines that I mentioned. So the way that we work is that we bring in our experts in lots of different disciplines and methodologies to make sure that we have the right team for the right job. But what do we do? What we do at sistemaFutura is to try to understand complex systems and to shape them for social impact, very much thinking about how to make the world a better place. In a number of issues, but we specialize in gender-based violence, financial inclusion, the sustainability and the environment, and social inclusion. What we try to do is develop an understanding through models of a system, and that could be, from the qualitative to the very quantitative and computational. And those models are just a tool to help us understand where in the system it is important to see a change for things to improve, not only today, but sustainably for the better, to create new feedback systems and new dynamics that are reinforcing and sustain change towards a better outcome. And for us, it is important to think about this as a way to improve the efficacy of behavioral interventions so that they don't become just tactical, but also strategic in the way that they interact within systems. Next. And this brings me to why we're here. Why are we doing this at all? So about 5 years ago, Richard Thaler said that behavioral science researchers are almost always trying to nudge in the context of complex systems in which they can at best tweak behavior at the margin. And I think this was a problem of our own creation as behavioral scientists, and I'll take, part of the blame here as well. We became too good at doing something. We all know how to diagnose a behavioral problem, create a nudge for it, and how to test its efficacy through something like a randomized controlled trial. But that really kind of trapped us in a place where we are looking at behavior really at that last mile when people are kind of deciding what to do, but in a context they can hardly change. He was not the only one. Of course, there were many voices that joined this train of or this criticism of the field. And it was more a reflection of the field, of us saying, hey, what else? There's so much more to behavioral science. There's so much more we can do. And we are basically answering that call and saying, what else can we do? How can behavioral science reach its full potential? Next, please. To illustrate that dynamic, let's use an example. So when we see cars speeding around a school, for example, we have a challenge that if they're unable to stop, if there's an accident, children get hurt. We could model that a little bit more graphically. Here's a challenge. If the cars speed, kids get hurt, right? For those of you who are not familiar with system mapping, green arrow means this increases that. So if more cars speed, more kids get hurt. Next, please. Okay, so we get into problem-solving mode and we say, what can we do? One of the answers may be speed bumps. Behavioral science has a lot to say about this. You've all seen kind of like graphics that make the street look uneven or weird, or that look like a child is playing on the street. And that just is attempting to get cars to reduce the speed in the specific moment in time where the speed bump is, right? So again, if we're thinking about this problem linearly, this is very clear. If you install a speed bump, cars will slow down, therefore fewer kids will get hurt. That's what the red arrow means. The less cars, or the more than cars slow down, the fewer children that get hurt. And sometimes, look, problems are linear, and they're that isolated, and that's all there is to that, and that's fantastic. So in many cases, that is the right tool, and that is the right solution, and that's where it all ends. However, in many situations, we find that there is, for example, feedback. So let's think about the more narrow streets that surround this like larger highway or larger street where we install the speed bump. And now that cars are annoyed, people, of course, react and respond to their environment. They know there's a speed bump. They know that there's more traffic on that bigger road. They take the smaller roads. So what happens? Because cars slow down, then some shift to the narrower roads where the kids are playing. So more kids get hurt. Maybe not on that street, but overall they do. And this is what's called a spillover effect that creates a feedback loop. So sorry. Let's say that Waze starts sending people as well, or Google Maps also adjusts and start sending people to the more narrow or the smaller streets. And then you see that this is creating a reinforcing feedback loop where more and more people are going to those streets to avoid the slowing down in the main street. So we're seeing more and more kids get hurt. Every time kids get hurt, next please, there's social pressure or political pressure. And because we're still thinking about this narrowly from the top down, every time there's political pressure, we have more speed bumps, which is only increasing or exacerbating the problem because we haven't taken into account this dynamic of the problem is that cars are now going to the smaller streets. So yeah, I mean, some problems are just complex and interdependent, right? Like they have these dynamics where people respond and react. So let's say that cars start to also just ignore the speed bump. So you have a false sense of security that you've solved the problem, that things are doing better, but actually things are probably even worse because if you speed through a speed bump, you may lose control, etc. So actually things are still being aggravated, right? And that is what we're talking about. We are thinking about how do we still think about behavior and how do we intervene to encourage positive behaviors, but by understanding the whole system and what are those spillovers, so those feedback dynamics, and those interactions that happen not only directly, but also indirectly and over time that may impact how behavior, like the sustainability of your intervention. So again, here, sometimes it is fine to have a linear intervention, but sometimes when you only focus on that small part of the problem and we ignore the rest, then we face a problem. And that's where it all started. at least for us.
Can I take it from here? For this
Yes,
next
please.
part? So what I didn't mention is that we are both in various states of disarray from travel and sickness. So we're going to take this a little informally. I'm going to walk through some case studies for you all, but I know I sound like a dying frog. I'm sorry. Just ask questions, take it where you want to go. This stuff is fascinating. There's a tremendous amount going on in the field, and we certainly can't cover it all now. So just ask some questions as you go along. I'll see them in the chat, and you can also just speak up, right? Let's be informal about it. Okay, so one, we're not the only ones, right, who are seeing this challenge. That behavioral science is awesome. It's a very effective precision tool that can help change behaviors, but it's just not the right tool for all situations, right? And but it has this insight about the interaction between cognition and context that's very valuable. And so how might we stretch it? How might we use this tool in new ways, especially when there's this intertwining of people's behavior? Like the example you gave, that is what happens here in Costa Rica. It is crazy. So we're at the point where everybody just speeds through the speed bumps. It's kind of like a race to see how much of a bump you can get off the thing. It's terrible, right? Because it looks like everything's better. You get a false sense of security, and it's just worse. And so these are not new topics. There's nothing, there's nothing unique here. It's just not something that behavioral science and behavior change work usually takes into account. Instead, they're long and very thoughtful traditions of systems analyses. And I should say they're traditions because they're quite distinct. There are people who do systems thinking, very qualitative approach. There are people who do detailed simulation modeling, social network analysis, which is more on a mathematical analysis of people's connections. But the key is that there are lots of different communities who have been working on these problems, and we can listen, we can learn, we can see what they're doing. And so there are a variety of different groups now that are looking at creative combinations of behavioral science, behavioral design, SBC, kind of that world of focusing on behavior and trying to help change it for the better, and the systems analysis. What we find is that each side has its weakness, and the strength of the other in many ways addresses the weakness. So behavioral science, really good at understanding cognition and context and the opportunities for change for a person. Not usually so good at seeing the interaction over time on people, spillovers, right? As I mentioned, the things that we are explicitly trying to avoid in our studies, in our research. We're not so good at that, right? Not so good at understanding the interaction with structure, the interaction with social norms, not just the one-way influence. Systems work really good at that. That's their thing. But usually doesn't focus on, well, the quirks of the mind and the real opportunities for change and where people struggle with even something they want to do. And so together, this is a powerful combination. We saw the first synthesis, the first public one, the first one that was seen, came from work in 1918, sorry, as I said, sick, I'm sorry, 2018, that's much more likely, 2019, with Joe Devon Hale and Joe Devon Witten, sorry, um, at UCL, and some work that was published a few years later. This was one of the first ones. UCL has then come out with a series of these. In this case, they were looking at decarbonization in, I believe it was in Wales, and awesome project. They kind of kicked things off. They actually started a training program, started teaching others. Around the same time, Ruth Schmidt, as the first UCL piece came out, Ruth Schmidt started writing and really thinking about the brittleness of our interventions. The way that when we find a solution, it doesn't seem to hold up over time. It doesn't generalize. It doesn't scale. It doesn't even work necessarily in the same place over time. She was studying why that is in the systemic context of that brittleness, which is really awesome. Behavior Works Australia, a variety of shops started picking this up. And then we started seeing the funders, we started seeing the organizations explicitly asking for this combination of behavioral science and systems work. Woohoo! Let me get a drink of water. Sorry. So UNICEF, UNDP, ILO, etc. Betsy, just this nonprofit organization that I'm involved with, and other people on the call are sort of organizing meetings to kind of bring together this community of which sistemaFutura is a part, but we're very proud and very happy to be alongside many others. And we see from this growing community is that there are really kind of two main areas of application of the synthesis. One is, call it kind of behavioral science plus, which is thinking about the broader system around your intervention. I'm going to show you an example of that. And that's better behavioral science. Again, you don't always need it, and there are many cases you don't, but when you do, it makes behavioral science more effective. The other one is, how can we use behavioral science in a different way? How can we bring the expertise of cognition and context to systems analyses, to strategy work, to figure out what behavior should be changed in the first place, where there are opportunities for change in a large scale, not just how can we make a better intervention in a particular place. And so I could give hour-long, day-long description of how all this stuff works. And in fact, that's actually what we do. We train people in this, but it's probably a whole lot easier if I just give you some examples. So I'll start with the familiar, which is the behavioral science plus. Like, what does it mean to look beyond? And there are a variety of people doing this. I'm just going to show one example. But this is in the tradition of UCL's work. This is in the tradition of Monash and behavior works work, etc. So this one was about waste and corruption in family planning. So these are the provision of free materials like condoms, or things like that in a sub-Saharan country. We're not supposed to say what the country is, so I'll leave it there. This is joint work between Sistema and Busara, which is a great shop in Nairobi, well, based in Nairobi, but works around the world. And the challenge here is, well, there's widespread theft. I mean, a massive amount of money leaves the system. And that hurts the government, it's also international funders who are making this happen. And the goal was to figure out, well, what are better interventions to overcome corruption? There are already a series of interventions to try to address this, but what do you do, right? They're not working. How do you improve this situation? And so, using a similar visual language to what I showed before, well, you start, often in this process, you want to start with the outcome, not just the behavior, but the outcome. In this case, people aren't getting the supplies they need, right? That's in the center. And a little bit of background research can show, okay, there are a variety of reasons that, yes, there's direct corruption, and sometimes people aren't getting it because of that corruption and they leave. Sometimes they're not getting it because of that corruption and they're asked for money and they don't have the money. But there are a variety of factors can lead to this negative outcome. And so we can analyze and say, yes, corruption is a process. Corruption is one of the outcomes. That's over on the right. And we can develop kind of a behavioral map plus. So it has the normal stuff you'd get in a behavioral map, which is step, 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 and a little bit more about the structure, a little bit more about what's going on in that process. And that's really useful, right? That helps you kind of see what's going on, to see the system. But there's more you can do, which is in a system-informed behavioral science, right? In behavioral science plus, you explicitly want to look beyond your intervention and what you want to have happen and say, what else is causing this problem? What else is leading to this? In this case, one of the major problems actually isn't corruption. It's bad data systems. It's that there are people think it's corruption, but actually the stuff's in the warehouse. It's just lost in the system. They don't know it's there. It's like, all this stuff went missing. Somebody must have stolen it. No, actually, that does occur. Absolutely. But sometimes it's sitting there and it's going bad and it's thrown out, whatever. But that's a challenge. Others are, well, they're actually real structural
Ó,
constraints.
manda
People
mensagem, o
leave.
pessoal vai te mandar um monte de pergunta que eu não entendi.
Okay. So people leave. They're not entering the data correctly, or there's funding shortages at the national level, and you can't make the supplies appear out of nowhere. But people blame it on corruption. And so these factors interact with each other, right? The more people think that corruption is what's actually going on, the more permissible it becomes. So a structural factor influences a social factor, influences a behavioral factor. Which, okay, as a methodologist, I gotta say, I find pretty cool. For the people on the ground, it's obviously it's a real problem. But these are the complex dynamics that can occur even when we're just looking at how do you decrease corruption. And so, yes, you get specific interventions that come from this process, again, because it's behavioral science plus. You can change that perception of normalcy because it's actually not as bad as people think. You can provide counterexamples. You can look at the incentives on understanding there's oh, sorry, folks. There's a fascinating literature on the behavioral on the conditions under which people are unethical, and you can it shows when people when a normal person will become unethical and when they won't, and a lot of those conditions are in place in this country that push people to be unethical, and so you can address some of those underlying structures, again, drawing on behavioral science, but adding this broader system understanding, and that's really cool. Now, that's the familiar. Let me go to the crazy now. So there's this continuum of, I put it as like two different things. The behavioral science plus and the systems work. I'm going to go far out there on the systems work and show how behavioral science can play a new role. But there's this long continuum of opportunities in between those. I just want to keep that in mind. So here's another, actually, let me stop. One, because I need some water. But two, any questions before we, again, keep it informal. Questions. I'm going to get some water while you're thinking. Okay. Did I miss any in the chat? What do we got? Okay. I see something there.
I
Yes.
think
Go
you're
through this.
good. Oh, yeah.
Yes. In any language, I know we've got a variety of folks. Oh, I should have mentioned also the translation is transduction is on. So you can change in the Zoom settings for it to provide captions in whatever language you want. Okay, cool. Okay, I don't see any questions yet, so let's get to the next fun part. So he says something very different. So FinSim is a financial simulation of people's decision making. And it looks at, this is a piece of software that looks at how life events, birth, death, marriage, etc., policy changes, I don't know, 50% tariffs on steel, 100% tariffs on China, stuff like that might happen. How that can affect the daily lives of people. Now, this particular case is based on the US. We're actually adapting it and we're using it in Kenya and in other places over time. And it uses the behavioral science literature on how people respond to changes in savings plan availability, in changes, economic literature on changes of income, how people respond to that. As many of you may know, there's a vast body of experimental research on how people respond to differences in framing and choice sets in their finances. Right? It's one of the main areas of research. It's where I came from for sistemaFutura. And so, this software simulates the actual people in the US. And currently it's a national representative sample, but you can scale it up or down. I've worked on 330 million person models before. But each person, each household is modeled as they make choices. Do I get married? Do I have a kid? Do I buy a house? Do I spend? Do I save? Etc. And you do that across the US. And you aggregate it up to the groups of interest. Say you want to look at what's happening right now, what's happening with African American families. You want to look at what's happening with a particular segment of low-income families, etc. And this is software. Strange. I'm going to show you what it looks like in a second. The behavioral science is a core component from the input. Actually, I should say the input, the functioning, and the output. So first, in order to understand how people act, we need the data. We need the data not just on what they're doing, because a lot of the government surveys that That's your ACS, that's your SCF, et cetera, that tells you how much money people have, how much they're spending, but also how they respond to change. That's where behavioral science comes in. And so we take in these studies, feed them into feed them into the software, and then out comes, hey, here are some opportunities. Now, in particular, oh, actually, I'll show you the user interface and I'll tell you a little bit more about the use cases. So this is actually what it looks like. So you can see we've got a particular, in this case, we're looking at St. Louis, and we're looking into congressional districts around it. We were analyzing a bill before the U.S. Congress where there are a variety of different provisions. It's called 401 Kids, working with a major financial institution and think tank. And this helped analyze, okay, what if there was this provision? What if there was that provision? What if this provision? And so this looks completely different than behavioral science. This is strategy. This is thinking about what policy options one should take. And there's also a very similar business angle. What product options, what marketing options are relevant? And with behavioral science, the role of behavioral science here is it feeds in to the model. Our knowledge, our expertise helps make it real. So I used to work on computational models, right? And there's a long tradition of computational models that have the same problems of economic rationality that behavioral science was built to address. Behavioral science can help inform those and say, no, actually, this is what we understand about how people respond in a situation. This is what we understand. So as you start looking at hypotheticals, we can't just do a straight line. No, this is how social norms evolve over time. This is how people respond to, well, changes in the wealth of other people in their neighborhood. We have data on that. We have research on that. And so we can make a better understanding of the world than the systems community currently have by working together. Okay? And so this combined approach allows you not only to better understand, but also to then test particular interventions. So when you're working on financial wellness, you're working across the country, it's really hard to roll out 10 different, certainly 100 different interventions across the entire country and just see what works. Rather, it's really expensive. So this allows you to do sandbox testing, to test out different hypotheses about interventions that you then go further design and test in the field. It's really cool. It's limited. It's not perfect, but it's really cool. One of the things it allows you is, in addition to testing out, you've got some ideas, you want to go test them out in this sandbox before you make the very expensive intervention in the field, RCT, whatever it might be. You can also work backwards and say, hey, I don't know what's going to be most effective here. We understand behavioral science helps us understand how the system works, but really what's going to be the best way to change this? What's the leverage point, as it were, in systems language? Well, the simulation and some tools that we'll talk about shortly can analyze lots and lots of different changes. Not ones you're hypothesizing, but just going through the whole system and saying, let's change this, let's change this, let's change this. And it can automatically test for leverage, for ways that you might address, ways that you might tweak the system and make it somewhat better for the well-being of the people in it. And then finally, it also helps you forecast and say, okay, I have this intervention right now. It's great, it's awesome, it seems to be working. What happens if interest rates change? What happens if, I don't know, there's a mass deportation? What happens if there is a change in the government, of different policies? What might that look like? I'm using a lot of US examples because this particular model is based in the US and these are the types of things we look at. But in Kenya, we're looking at things, we're looking at economic changes, macroeconomic changes. We're looking at large international programs and how they affect on the ground finances of people in their lives, etc. Now that's one example. Here's another one, actually, that we're doing in Kenya, which is this one is about the health of children with a large multinational organization. You could probably guess. looking at how their different projects overlap and where they can be complementary and where they might be competing with each other. Okay. And this allows us to look at unemployment, look at inflation, as well as look at how the different programs are interacting with each other. There's another one we're doing in the US. This one is around deaths of despair, so alcohol overdose, drug overdoses, etc. And looking at how different efforts, there are a wide range of different efforts out there, and a lot of disagreement on how to best tackle this problem. This is a sandbox that lets you test ideas when real lives are on the line, and you want to get as close as you can to a reasonable solution before you get tested out in the field. Okay.
Steve,
And so
you've got
that's
a
the
question on
background.
in
Yes.
the chat.
Oh, goody.
Sorry.
Yes, I like questions. Okay. Behavioral research is used as the basis of the algorithm. Yes, that is correct. Yeah. It is one of the inputs for predicting changes. Now, predicting is, we use that term somewhat, particularly in the stats in the econ world, to say we have an existing situation and we want to project into the future. And that is, yes, you do that. But one of the key benefits here is you've got a sandbox. You can say, no, I don't want to just predict. I want to change something fundamental about the system and then see how people adapt. So it's a question of adaptation. Well, that was interesting. It's a question of adaptation as well as strict prediction. So I hope that helps. Other questions, thoughts? So those were two very, very different examples. Completely out there, and in the simulation world, it's probably very unfamiliar to many of you, and one that looks much more like behavioral science. There's a continuum between these, where Ruth, for example, Ruth Smith, has a powerful technique to think about how you process qualitative interviews, identify the major factors at work, and kind of construct this, construct a system map and understand opportunities for change. So you're adding some additional tools that are very foreign to behavioral science, but it's another step down the line. We're actually working with her and others on automating more of that process using AI. Not quite a full simulation model, but it helps analyze this in a more rigorous way. So there are very many levels of quantification, many levels of kind of drawing from these techniques. There's another version which uses social network analysis to understand the connections between people. It is a wide open and exciting field out there right now. Okay, so yes, Andrea, I see your hand is raised.
I don't know why why I have that name and I have to change it.
Oh,
So
yes.
Stephen, just
I don't know why.
I know. Hey,
Sorry. Yes.
so I know this
Go
is
ahead.
not the focus of the presentation today, but there is some uncertainty involved into these models, no? Like especially
Of course.
in complex systems, in particular, you can have these simulations going to wildly different places. I see the result as presenting, suggesting there is a single result or a more likely scenario. So I don't know if you have thought about introducing that complexity into presenting the results, or
Yes.
I think that's something worth thinking about.
That is a great question. Yes. I'd asked Andrea, Andrea's on our team. I'd asked her, just in case people had a problem with Zoom, with the registration, to post the direct to the meeting link. And that unfortunately is tied to a person. So there you go. Our second Andrea. Okay, what's your name again? Your actual name?
Gustavo.
Okay. Oh, right. Sorry. Okay. It's tiny on my screen here. I can't see you, Prime. Okay, so yes, excellent question. There is tremendous variability, and I want to talk about that in two different ways. One is when you model it this way, the limitations of our knowledge become much clearer. So to do this right, you add nothing and you take away nothing from what you would use in a qualitative process, the expertise of the people involved, The experts as in book experts, as well as experts as in lived experience, right? People who have actually gone through it. And that's actually the process we use, is we start with that process. And so what you don't usually see when we're thinking of our interventions, when we're developing a behavioral map, when we're doing behavioral design, is we don't see is how much variability actually exists in behavioral science itself and in the conditions and the interventions we're developing. That problem of variability is always there. When you start running a simulation, you get to see it. And so to me, that's facing the reality and the limitations of our knowledge square on. And I think it's great. Now, that said, there's also some fancy tools you can use to help quantify and to understand the effect of that. And in particular, you can work backwards and say, for a particular outcome, we know that the rate at which people have this current behavior or how they react to this, we know that there's uncertainty around that. So let's go test every single possible version of that, or some discrete sampling of it, right? Let's go test the different versions and see if it actually affects which intervention we should run in the field. Is it a difference that matters, or a difference that's true, but it doesn't, right? That is an uncertainty quantification, that's what we call it, right? Now, there's also, when we present real results, I would never just say, here's the answer. I was showing a very simplified version. Actually, I'll show you a teaser right after this. We show what a real computational laboratory. Yes, you need to look at the full distribution of outcomes in order to be honest about that variation. Sorry, I realize I can get very technical very quickly. I hope I didn't annoy others on the call. But Gustavo, was that good?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. And the key here is that we're not the experts. We're not the experts in, well, all of the dynamics of financial behavior out there. We're also not the experts in simulation modeling or in social network. There are communities that we draw from and we learn from. And the key is, as behavioral scientists, can we bring our expertise and find and use a structure that allows other people to bring theirs? That's what we're trying to do. And so, yes, there's a long tradition in systems modeling of quantifying and understanding the effects of that uncertainty. We're not coming up with it. We're bringing it in and bringing it together with what behavioral science has to offer. So just never to overplay. Other questions on that? We have a little bit more, but this is good. Keep it coming. Yeah. Zahid.
Hi. Thanks very much, Stephen and Ali. Al? Yeah. Because I think, the fact that you are moving beyond behavioral science and trying to connect it to systems thinking and complexity, I think is brilliant. And the fact that you also want to bring in other types of tools, like you mentioned, social network analysis. I think it's really good, really good. One of the things, so I've also been trying to think about this process, and I've been coming primarily from a systems thinking angle.
Yep.
So how, as a systems thinker, and I apply systems thinking in conflict and peace processes, how can behavioral science be useful when I'm doing the systems thinking? So I've done, for example, I worked in on a political process, a recent political process, with one of the UN special envoys. And we did a whole big systems map and identified who the key actors were, and that were the leverage points within those systems map. And then who was driving the leverage points, okay? And then I thought, you know what, this is a great time to understand behaviors and understand why power is being challenged and why power is not being challenged around these leverage points. And this is where I could have really done with you guys. So I'm curious to know, the question I guess I have for you is, how are you using behavioral theory or behavioral change or behavioral approaches to understand how we can challenge power dynamics, and how they can then fit that into systems mapping and analysis and leverage points, etc.
Ali, do you want to? What do you think?
No, absolutely. I mean, your question is so aligned with the work that we're doing, and I think that we get often asked, what's different from typical behavioral science at a leverage point. And I think that power analysis that you mentioned, I think, is a starting point to think, at a leverage point. We often, as behavioral scientists, think about who's the largest group of people that whose behavior I want to change. And I think a really important question is who has the power to change this? And can they do it alone? Or does it have to be a combination or a reinforcing? Do we have to nudge multiple people or like try to influence the behavior of multiple people at the same time and over time, right? Like not just today, but over time. So I think at that point, a more traditional behavioral science analysis kicks in, combined with a power analysis. So like at that leverage point, we would think about doing behavior journey mapping or behavior mapping for multiple actors to understand the dynamics between them, how they influence each other, how do they have dependencies today and over time, and then run through that behavioral diagnosis of what factors are driving the behavior. And some of them may be things like incentives or more structures, and some others may just be actually like individual cognitive factors that are affecting the way they are behaving. But we try to think very critically about people individually then, and then think about the interactions and how those need to be accounted for that change to happen, if that makes sense. Steve, do you want to add anything there?
Yes, I was a little distracted by answering the other, but no matter I'm sorry, did you already say this? Um, Systems of power are driven by structure, by privilege, by money, etc. But the change is always going to be driven by people. Did you already say that? Did I just miss that? Okay, good. Hey, good. Sorry, I was responding and then trying to understand the Portuguese for the next one. Oh no, sorry, Spanish for the next one. And so exactly right. Behavioral science can pick up right after what you were doing. And that's part of the strategic handoff, and say just a combined whole is much more powerful. But it can also be used earlier to inform that process, to say, okay, realistically, it can help you in your leverage point analysis better understand what's feasible. So, there you go. But again, sorry if I just repeated something that was already done.
Thank you.
Did we cover it? Somewhere between us? Okay. Hey, Casey. Christoph.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Building on Gustav's prior points of just the uncertainty in the system, I'm curious, can you speak a little bit to the accuracy, let's say, of prediction of your model as compared to, let's say, more classical approach, and maybe how you actually promote or maybe argue for different interventions in front of key stakeholders?
So, assuming you implement the economic model, the statistical model, econometric model, and the simulation model, whether it's system dynamics, agent-based model, etc., the prediction given the current state to a future state, right, is mathematically equivalent. So they're actually the same thing. You can model one in the other. Now, the power comes from going off track, looking at hypotheticals, looking at adaptation. That's where your the assumptions of independence, the assumptions that underlie well, lots of different assumptions of non-adaptive behavior, of history-free responses, et cetera, that come from the economic world, that you don't have those constraints in the simulation world. So again, assuming you didn't screw it up, theoretically, any model can be converted from one to another. And I actually worked on that for some time. I worked on a couple different translations to make that clear. But there are a variety of analyses that make that case more fully. So the real power comes in off in predicting outside of the existing data set, and it's like any other. It's like any machine learning algorithm, et cetera. It depends on the quality of your data, depends on how different the world is, and it depends on how deep your understanding of people's adaptation. And that's where behavioral science shines, is it's not just a guess of, hey, I think that people might respond to this price difference. They might respond to this. But we actually have research where we can isolate that effect and feed it in. So now, that said, the proof is always in the pudding. Are you actually changing people's lives? Can you run an RCT? Can you run a rigorous study, whether it's an RCT or not, of this approach versus another? That would be pretty difficult. But we've looked at some of those situations, right? So anyway, there's a long technical answer. I'm trying to avoid that. Happy to dive into more detail with you, but I hope that answered the kind of the core path.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. Oh, so I see there's a question, and yeah, why don't we, we've got more time. We only have a little bit more. Why don't I just quickly give those final bits, and we'll come back to the next questions. Does that sound good? Okay, cool. All right. So there are a variety of ways to do this. The way we call it is BESIS, behavioral systems. You get the idea, BESIS. You build alignment. You try to understand what's the fundamental problem you're trying to solve. Here we go. Build alignment. Try to see what the fundamental problem is. There's a set of tools that can help you with that. You explore what's going on in that system. Like as I said, you try to add nothing and take nothing away from the expert understanding. Lived experience expert as well as book expert or academic expert. And draw from that. And the question is, how do we then synthesize that into a map, qualitative, that helps us see what's going on, and or into a model that helps us experiment with it in different ways, right? And the qualitative world, the systems thinking world, is much more accessible. It's open to everybody, but in a few cases, it's valuable to have the quantification. And so I've talked about this long continuum of different approaches. From that, you do what Zahid mentioned of identifying strategic leverage, identifying leverage points, either in a qualitative or in a quantitative way, a variety of different techniques for it. You look at potential impacts, you trace through the system, there are a variety of different ways you can use this, and then you can say, okay, what would this look like in a different environment? What would this look like if now we take these leverage points and we do traditional behavioral science? What would it look like if we have an existing intervention and we want to bring it somewhere else? That's the process. It is iterative. It's easier to show in a line, but it's iterative. We learn over time. You often go back to a prior stage, but it's pretty straightforward. But there are a lot of really cool things that go along the way that can add to this straightforward process. I'm just going to give you a few teasers of what else is possible and what else is done out there. So we've talked a bit about agent-based modeling and a bit about systems thinking. This is part of that continuum between system dynamics. There are other tools for a very quantified approach on how things change over time. So from network analyses, there's a wide range of different tools out there. System dynamics in particular helps us understand common structures that drive behavior. So escalation, when two groups are either intentionally or unintentionally competing, and everyone's worse off because of it, right? Tragedy of the commons, the use of shared resources, that everyone's worse off. This work comes from game theory, comes from system dynamics. But Diana Mellows, Eleanor Ostrom, and others, they're the foundation of much of our knowledge in the field, and we're learning from them, saying, how can this apply in our situation? We call these archetypes, common situations that occur in system structure, that you change the labels, you change the meaning of everything, but this fundamental feedback loop still drives bad outcomes. And there's reams and reams of work and thought on how you address these system structures that, again, we don't need to make up. We learn from and we listen to these researchers out there. And then, to your point, Gustavo, earlier, yes, then there's some fancier tools as well. I didn't want to go into them in detail here, but you do a full computational laboratory that lets you look at the range of possible outcomes, who benefits, who doesn't from a particular intervention, and the threshold for risk, the likelihood of different events occurring, etc. I love this stuff. Gustavo, maybe you and I can talk for hours afterwards. So this is fun stuff. That's all I'm gonna do. Next steps. You want to learn more? You want to get involved? Take it away, Ali.
Yeah, so as Steve mentioned, look, we're excited to be a part of a community that is evolving this from multiple angles. But our goal is to really see this moving forward and seeing new ways of actually making a dent on complex issues and to see behavior change playing a part in that. So we are very happy to share with all of you who join and anyone who registered for this, our reading list. So you can learn more about all of these disciplines. I see in the chat people asking about how to learn more about this. You can definitely take classes in this or that, or read some of our some of the items on our reading list, but definitely challenge people in either discipline to integrate the other. What would happen if they did think about behavioral science in systems, or if they thought more systemically in behavioral science? So definitely we'll share this, read more, engage with us. We would love to hear from you. Next. We are in July, on July 9th and 10th, we're holding a training session in London. We have a few of these sessions over the year. The next one is just there in London. It's an exciting two-day process where we go through the very detailed process that we follow. We share more examples. If you want to come learn and work with us, it would be super exciting to get to know you better and see what you're working on, to learn from each other and to share with you what we're up to. Next, please.
Should mention that we had that we had on the training that we had a early bird pricing that officially ended on Friday. We are happy to extend for people who joined today. I don't know, by Wednesday. How about that? The lower price. But just reach out to us. Happy to chat with you. Okay, sorry.
Absolutely. No, I was just going to say, because I think the next slide is about the materials. So yeah, we basically work through our workbook that explains, or that goes through very detailed examples on how to build a model, how to do a lot of these analyses for the whole BESIS process. How do you go step by step on doing, systems informed behavioral science or behavioral informed systems analysis. So like it's honestly has been really fun to develop, and it would be amazing to exchange that with you. And then and we'll be sharing some more of that. So I don't know if you learned about this webinar through LinkedIn, you saw potentially that we are sharing more of our case studies and more of our methodology. So now that we have a little bit more time to think about what's happened over the last year, we're starting to share more. So please engage, reach out to us. It could be through joint projects, or also if you are interested and would love to work with us, you could also join our affiliate network. We're also looking for amazing people to work with. So Steve shared that this is part of kind of like a compendium of like, he shared those like fancy and exciting simulation models that we are building. That's kind of like a software or a dashboard that can really do complex analysis in the background. But it doesn't have to be that. Behavioral systems is a lot more approachable than that. And a lot of the projects that we do are basically behavioral design in the traditional way, but having a more systemic understanding of what's happening in that person's decision to change their behavior. And we use a lot of participatory qualitative research to design those models that help us understand the system, find those leverage points, and then design behavioral science interventions that have that understanding of a system. Oftentimes, when you have that model that shows you the dynamics, and that could be qualitative or just graphic, the point is to help us focus and understand where in a system we should be putting our time and energy. Should we be working with this or trying to influence this behavior of this actor or that actor, or do they have to work together? And how does that happen over time? So basically what we're looking for is trying to understand where in the system should we be placing our attention for behavioral interventions. Again, you could also simulate the way that Steve described FinSim and other projects. That is kind of like a sophisticated way of doing it, but obviously a very exciting one. that has a lot more capability. And we're also working quite a bit on training partners to do this work and to be more thoughtful. We think the more people working on this, the better, because we'll advance faster and we'll have more impact. So again, really excited to be sharing more of this and to be learning from other people, being a part of a community. And yeah, as I mentioned, always looking for great people to work with. So if you're interested, send us a line as well about the affiliate network. Great. So with that, we have 2 minutes for Q&A, but it's good, we've actually been going through it as the call has run through, but are there any other questions? Yeah. Anyone else has a comment, a question? We're really happy to stay a little bit over and chat with you.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to. And you don't have to raise your hand, just go off mute if you'd like. Looking through.
Yeah, I'll probably
Christoph.
say that hey, sorry. Excuse me for my voice. I'm also under the weather, so to speak. I would be curious to learn about other AI tools that you employ to map different networks, social networks, and so on. So I don't know if that's in scope of this conversation, but it sounds interesting.
Happy to. So yeah, there are a variety of ways as you go from the purely qualitative to the computational. There are tools for better processing the qualitative information. There are tools for extracting and structuring that network, right? So going from systems thinking closer towards a causal loop diagram, which helps you see the causal relationships, and then further out there, AI can is helping us with generating synthetic populations that allow you to use lots of different data sources, qualitative and quantitative, to create one that is better and more accurate to the real population than any single data set can give you. So it's called the data synthesis or synthetic population generation. So those are some of the ways that AI is helping kind of along that spectrum. Other questions, thoughts before we wrap up? We had over 50% of the registrants join, which is pretty awesome. Usually we get 50 or below. But yeah, we had about, I don't know, 50 something people register, and I saw up to 35 folks join the call. So thank you so much, especially for our first webinar. We're very happy to have you. We will do more of this. Please do join us in the training if you're interested in the area. And if you're not, but you'd like to learn more, just reach out. Let's see what we can do. Right? We want to help grow this field and help other people learn and do this and expand behavioral science in new ways.
Yeah, and if you thought this was interesting and exciting, again, share with us what you want to hear more about. We're also happy to share some of the examples that are less computationally sophisticated, because yeah, maybe we can have more of a conversation of what's in between and how can we improve the methodology for everybody in a way that is accessible. Yes, Casey?
I would suggest one last question. What is the easiest way to join maybe a community of behavior system designers, I suppose? Is there a Slack group or?
That's
It's
a softball there. Yes. In fact, it's in the chat right now. So we had a behavioral systems groups last year. Somebody who shall remain nameless, let it go. But we are reviving it now, and so we'll have monthly or bi-monthly events on these topics. We're bringing in speakers, folks who are doing this type of work. I think Ruth is in the first one. Yeah, so that's in there's a LinkedIn group, and it's on the Betsy website as well. There we go. I think we're good on questions. I see people dropping off. So awesome. Thanks, everyone.